History of a Teacher. Chapter 2. Remarkable Entrance. Taking the train to Hogwarts didn't really go the way Yugi had planned. He had asked Tom, the barkeeper, from where the Hogwarts Express would be leaving, and he had gotten the serious answer. Platform 9 3/4 from King's Cross Station. Everyone knows that. So now he was standing on King's Cross Station at Platform 9, desperately trying to find Station 9 3/4. He considered asking someone that worked there, but he was rather sure that they wouldn't know, and that he'd make a fool of himself. Now he had only 5 minutes left before the clock turned 11 and the train left, and he hadn't a single clue where to be. He cursed silently in Japanese and kicked the barrier between Platform 9 and 10. He barely kept himself from screaming as his foot went straight through. I think you found the way to Platform 9 3/4, Yugi, Atem said in a surprised tone that only he could manage. He didn't tell his lighter that he wasn't pleased with the lack of patience as Ikari had developed. Not that Atem wasn't used to impatient people, it just wasn't Yugi. I guess, Yugi whispered and looked around to make sure no one was watching before he took a step into the barrier. Very suddenly, Platform 9 3/4 appeared before him. He had expected to be met by the sight of a gleaming steam engine, but he saw instead a scarlet dot against the still blue sky, leaving a trail of smoke behind it. He couldn't believe it! He had missed the train! I can't believe it! I am supposed to teach! How could I miss the train? Yugi followed these words with some imaginative Japanese cursing. He had drawn some attention to him. People had been apparating away quickly, but now the loud cracks had stopped, and nearly everyone had his eyes on him. Just every now and then the sound of a crack filled the air when someone decided his arrival was none of their business and separated. Yugi knew that he usually drew a lot of attention to himself, mostly due to his hair or the fact that he still was the reigning king of games. However, about the last, he shouldn't need to worry anymore, he hoped, and however weird his hair was, it wasn't weird enough to silence an entire platform. Had he done something wrong? Sir? Said a red-haired man close to where Yugi stood. He had a golden ring in one ear and his long hair in a ponytail. For some reason, he sounded suspicious. People are not supposed to be able to come through the barrier from that way after the train leaves. How? Bill, an older red-haired man, no doubt family to the guy named Bill, said calmly. Teachers at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry are able to come through the barrier longer if they are late. Are you a teacher? For understandable reasons, the man did not seem to believe Yugi was. I am supposed to be the new teacher of History of Magic, but they failed to inform me how to get to Platform 9 3/4. I'm a foreigner, you see, Yugi explained briefly. He was not fond of questions. Ah, yes, Dumbledore mentioned something about a new teacher. Between you and me, I think the school really needed a new teacher in History of Magic, the elder red-haired man said. Perhaps my son Bill here can give you a ride to Hogsmeade. From there you can walk. It will be quite a long walk, but it is not impossible. Dad? Bill asked. How am I supposed to give him a ride? I didn't drive a car. Yugi was about to say that he could when Bill carried on. And it is not possible to reach Hogsmeade by car. The only way is the Flu network. Besides, Bill dragged his father further away and started to argue with him in a low voice so Yugi couldn't hear, while a big black dog strolled toward Yugi. It started to sniff at his boots, hands, and legs. Then it decided it didn't like Yugi and started growling at him. You don't like me, do you? He asked. Then he sighed. Nearly no one around here does. They all sense a lot more. Yugi, I'm not sure that's a dog. Don't tell him too much, Atem said, and stared at the dog, crouching in spirit form next to him. He waved his transparent hand before the eyes of the huge black dog, but it didn't react. That's a good thing at least. Be careful, don't reveal me to the wizarding world. I think we'd get in trouble if the headmaster already had problems accepting me. Snuffles, please! Another red-haired person, a woman this time, yelled. She was a short and robust woman with shabby clothes that looked like they came from a second-hand shop. To be honest, all the ones belonging to the family seemed to have cheap clothes. The woman was talking to the dog as if he was a person, which enlarged Atem's suspicion on Snuffles not being a dog. Can you stop being so hostile? I told you not to come. You only draw attention to yourself. First following the train, now this. The woman raged on a while longer, and then the two men who had stopped arguing were waiting her out. Apparently this happened a lot. I'm sorry, she said eventually. Snuffles often dislikes strangers, that's why we seldom take him out. I apologize. No problems. I'm no fan of strangers either. Yugi didn't realize what he had said until he already had said it. I don't mean... Oh, it's okay, she said, and wove it away with a little gesture of her hand. So you're stranded then? She sounded genuinely sorry for him, and Yugi appreciated it. In the last 4 years, he had gotten used to falseness and such. He had always known that he had good friends, but now that they were gone, he had learned exactly how extraordinary they had been. Yeah, it looks like it, he said, and went with a hand through his hair. The short woman, equally as tall as him, got a weird look on her face that made Bill burst out into laughter. What's funny? Yugi asked and expected a remark about his hair. Bill laughed even harder. Mom thinks my hair is weird, but so not. You take the praise. Although, Bill took a little pause. Only if it's natural. Yugi grinned. Yeah, of course it was a remark about his hair. It's all natural, and trust me, I have seen a lot of weird hairstyles. He thought about the guard with the weird pointy hair on Lulu's Kingdom. Really, who am I to call his hair pointy? Yugi thought. Though I guess I win anyway. He didn't sound particularly happy about it, but gave the others a smile. If you'll excuse me, I need to find a way to get to Hogwarts. Why don't you just apparate? Bill asked curiously. I mean, I know you can't apparate to Hogwarts, but to Hogsmeade you can. I can't apparate, Yugi said, and had trouble pronouncing the word correctly. He really had to get rid of that accent if he wanted to get any respect at all. Atem's voice would be helpful, but he didn't want to indulge respect into the students. Sorry, Yugi. You are the teacher, Atem said and grinned. He was glad that Yugi finally was socializing again with normal people, rather than with thugs in alleys. Don't you have an apparition diploma? Bill asked. No, that is not really the case, Yugi said and asked Atem, should I tell them? If you were planning on telling the students, there was no need to hide it from their parents, now is there? Of course, with a little bit of bad luck, these people are some of these muggle-hating killers. But I just really need to get to the school, he added quickly to end the questions about apparition. Use the flu network from the Leaky Cauldron, the older man suggested. The train will arrive around nightfall, so you've got time to walk from Hogsmeade to Hogwarts if you hurry. If you're really quick, you might even be able to catch the carriages. Thank you, Yugi said, unaware that he said it in Japanese, turning on his heels and ran straight out of the barrier. People could have seen that, Atem said dryly, but he actually didn't really care. Besides, what is the flu network? That was something he did care about. Don't know, Yugi answered through their mind link, but I bought a book named How to Read Your Neighbors. It is about every possible magical way of traveling. It is just that I haven't had time to read it yet. I'll have to do that, so we'll be late, but it can't be helped. Yugi didn't have a faultless stamina, and every now and then he stopped to catch his breath. Eventually, Atem offered to run a bit so Yugi could rest, and Yugi gladly accepted. As soon as Atem had sat down at a table in the Leaky Cauldron, Yugi took control again and opened his trunk, putting all the books he could find on the table. He went through them, casting them rather carelessly into the trunk if they weren't what he sought. Eventually, only How to Read Your Neighbors was on the table, and Yugi looked at the register to find Flu Network. Eventually, he found it and started reading. Well, that I should be able to manage, he told Atem and got to his feet. Tom, do you have some flu powder? I surely do, he smiled and added, doesn't cost much at all. After the feast, Dumbledore got to his seat. Severus had heard most of the speech before, and did only listen to half of it. He was searching for the new history of magic teacher Dumbledore had mentioned, the Muggle. But the only new face was that of Dolores Umbridge, and Severus was rather sure that Dumbledore wasn't confused enough to describe the person he had when he met this woman. So the new history of magic teacher was late. Why? The forest in the ground is out of bounds to students, and a few of our older students ought to know that by now too. Severus couldn't help but be annoyed by the smirks the Golden Group shared, and deep down he knew that it was just because he never himself had done that. Smirking at the headmaster's comments with his friends, not even with Lily. She had sat at the other side of the room, exchanging smirks with her friends. But Severus was not willing to look within himself and admit that. He rather peered out between his small eyes to take in the surroundings. Remind you all that magic is not permitted in corridors between classes, nor are a number of other things, all of which can be checked on the extensive list now fastened to Mr. Filch's office door. We have 2 changes in staffing this year. Severus sharpened his attention. This was what he wanted to know. For some reason, he had a foreboding feeling about the new history of magic teacher, despite the fact he had never met him before. There was a strange feeling of pity and compassion for the faceless stranger. Those were not two feelings Severus used to feel, and he felt very uncomfortable with them. He wanted the stranger to enter and make sure that he could dislike him.
We are very pleased to welcome back Professor Grumbly Plank, who will be taking care of magical creatures lessons. We also have the pleasure to welcome Professor Muto, who will be taking history of magic from now on. He is, however, not present, and it seems he had some trouble traveling here. Let's hope he'll arrive here soon and safely.
But no one cared about the last sentence the headmaster spoke. A huge murmur had broken loose in the great hall, and everyone was whispering about the unexpected change among the teachers. They all seemed convinced history of magic would become much better without Professor Binns. Severus had to admit that they were most likely correct for once. He raised a hand to quiet the crowd, and because he was Dumbledore, he succeeded.
We are also delighted to introduce Professor Umbridge, our new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher.
There was a rather dull applause, and many were more interested in whether the new teacher had arrived yet. But for some reason, people kept throwing glances at him. Severus was uncomfortable by the students' looks, and he glared back at anyone who happened to meet his gaze. It was not until Dumbledore continued about tryouts that Severus noticed that they weren't looking at him, but to his right. There was an empty chair standing there. How could he not have noticed? From an unexpected voice penetrated his pondering. He looked at the terribly toad-like witch as if she tried to strangle herself. Dumbledore looked also taken aback, but he didn't show it very long. He sat down and let her speak. Snape was not the only one who did no attempt to hide his dislike. For once, he nearly felt part of the group of adults at the head table. He even nearly felt a part of the students who were smirking at the woman scornful. "Thank you, headmaster," she said with such a high-pitched voice that it took Severus by surprise. He had expected something entirely different. The awfully pink woman continued, "For those kind words of welcome." He felt a shudder of dislike go through him. This woman he could kill without needing to mentally prepare for us, no matter how long he knew her. He noticed that he wasn't the only one that directly disliked her. Even Potter was glaring at her with dislike. With another annoying she continued, and Severus wished he could turn off the terrible voice while he closed his eyes. It penetrated his mind, and despite his efforts, he couldn't shut it off. Merciless, it crept into his head. "Well, it is lovely to be back at Hogwarts, I must say." Severus refused to open his eyes. He did not feel the need to see the terrible, fake, toad-like smile on her face that he could practically hear. The words kept drilling into his ears. "And to see such happy little faces looking back at me." Please, Severus thought, they are stupid morons, not 5. "I am very much looking forward to getting to know you all, and I'm sure we will be very good." As Umbridge was about to say friends, and Severus about to think, I pity the students. I can't believe it, but I do. One thing happened that both kept Umbridge from saying that last word and saved Severus from a personality crisis. The door flew open with a mighty force, and with long steps, a short figure entered the great hall. "I am sorry. For some reason, no one told me where to find platform 9 3/4. Severus just gaped at the short figure, and he wasn't the only one. The entire student body and the staff, with exception for Dumbledore, was staring at him. He had black leather pants with an iron chain going from one belt loop to another. He had a belt with a waist bag attached to it the size of a playing cards. He had black boots with buckles and a black tank top. His arms were bare yet muscular, except for several bracelets. He had some chains around each arm and a thick black bracelet on one of them with rivets on. He had a little red bag in which people used to have courts and such, and a choker around his neck, much like a dog collar in Severus's opinion. He had a black cape in wizard style. The cape was the only thing about him that was anything like wizard wear. An upside-down pyramid-shaped golden artifact hung from a thick chain around his neck. It was no doubt Egyptian. But the most exceptional thing about him was his hair. It was jet black, shaped like a starfish, standing up in 5 points. Those points were tipped with a sort of purple, and his fringe was blonde. His eyes were amethyst, and his face sharp. His eyes had nearly a childish look over them, but they were constantly narrowed due to grief and sorrow. It were those eyes that told you at once that he was too old to be a student. For some reason, Severus wasn't bothered by Umbridge's style anymore. This person he would have no trouble disliking. At least that was what he told himself. "Is that a new history of magic teacher?" Ron asked, and as if he had heard it, Dumbledore said,
Students, this is Professor Muto, your new History of Magic teacher. I expect you to behave in his lessons.
Harry frowned at that. Why would Dumbledore ask them that? Usually he let the teachers deal with the students themselves. He exchanged a look with Hermione, and it was clear she had also noticed the unusual encouragement of good behavior. Professor Muto now swept to the empty chair next to Snape and sat down. He was looking rather curious around himself. Probably he had never seen such a school before. To everyone's great surprise, Professor Umbridge decided to carry on with her speech. The Ministry of Magic has always considered the education of young witches and wizards to be of vital importance. The rare gifts with which you were born may come to nothing if not nurtured and armed with careful instruction. The further Professor Umbridge came in her speech, the less Harry listened, and he noticed he wasn't the only one. He did, however, notice that Hermione listened closely. So was the new history magic teacher and all the other staff members. Neither they nor Professor Umbridge cared about the fact that the students had stopped listening and were talking as if it was a regular dinner. Fred and George soon sat down beside them, clearly not interested in Professor Umbridge. Are you lot looking forward to your first history of magic class? Fred asked and looked mostly at Ron. Of course! With a teacher that looks like that, things must get more interesting. I personally look more forward to History of Magic than Defense Against the Dark Arts, Harry said, and threw the woman that was still rambling on a nearly disgusted look. Don't worry, Harry, Fred asked. If her lessons are just as terrible as her looks, then we will bully her, George continued. I'll do the school for you, Fred finished. That new teacher looks like it could go in our year, Ron said. He can't have taught before. Do you think we could fool him out of giving us homework? Harry was grateful that Hermione still was listening carefully to Professor Umbridge. He could imagine what she would have said had she heard it. Wonder where he is from? Harry asked himself and looked at the teacher. Why do you think he's from abroad? His English is flawless, Ron said and frowned. You know, little brother, you should really be, George started, more attentive. What did I miss? Ron asked, confused. He couldn't figure out what would have given the new History of Magic teacher away. He didn't know where Platform 93 was, Harry explained. Neither did you the first time, Ron said, still confused. Ron, 24 hours before I, for the first time, set foot on the Hogwarts Express, I didn't even know that I was a wizard. Harry snapped back at his red-haired friend. Fred pulled an arm around Ron's head, which Ron immediately started fighting and said, Don't fight, little prefect, Ronnie set off. George laughed and added, Only we are allowed to do that. Who's giving you that right? Ron snapped at his older twin brothers as he managed to remove Fred's arm. Us, of course, the pair said simultaneously. Well, that was illuminating, Hermione said, and suddenly Harry and Ron were aware that Umbridge had stopped talking. Neither of the two bothered to give the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher an applause.
That was truly interesting,
Tim said. Was it? Yugi wondered. I didn't get a lot of it. Didn't make much sense to me.
Tim chuckled darkly. Since I used to be a pharaoh, I am rather used to boring speeches and know how to take the important things out of such a speech.
Yugi smiled a bit. That's right. So I have an experienced politician to help me through such boring speeches, which means I don't have to listen next time. But serious now. What did she say that was important?
She said they want to improve the school. But to me, it sounds like an excuse to interfere and spy on what is going on. I believe she might be going to dig around in this place, perhaps in who we are.
Tim frowned. He didn't like the teacher in pink at all. His intuition told him not to like the toad-like woman, not to trust her in the slightest. Perhaps if we do some more reading on the current political situation, we could find out what she really wants, Yugi suggested and looked closely at the students. They hadn't seemed to approve of the toad-like teacher either. Clearly she had broken some unwritten rule when she made her speech.
Sounds like a good idea to me,
Tim said.
We have been told about the Dark Lord's return, but we do not know much about the events from 14 years ago, or the minister's role in this.
Yugi smiled. Tim's words had given him an idea how to start his lessons on Monday. The students were dismissed, and Yugi realized that he would have to deal with the teachers first. As the students were leaving the Great Hall, and while the staff left for the staff room, he heard a call of, Hey, you lot, midgets! Followed by a loud and sharp, Run! Yugi couldn't help but smile at that. He might just start to like the school. That's something he had counted on. As soon as the door closed behind Yugi, who was the last to enter, the noise from the Great Hall disappeared.
Since we weren't able to take this on the train, I can do it now. Let me introduce you all to Yugi, the new history of magic teacher.
What happened to Professor Binns? An older witch with clothes. What happened to Professor Binns? An older witch with clothes that looked like they belonged in a hospital from about 100 years ago asked.
Cuthbert realized that he was dead.
The headmaster said, rather insensitive, and Yugi's head snapped up. Excuse me? He said with surprise and shock.
Oh, right, I forgot. You would not be used to it. We have a certain amount of ghosts in the school. They are all homeless, except for Peace, the school's poltergeist. Professor Binns never realized he was dead and kept teaching as a ghost. However, this summer someone told him he was dead, which wasn't good for him.
Perhaps they won't mind you so much, Yugi remarked, and Attempt chuckled.
Let me introduce you to the rest of the teachers. First, there is Professor Phileas Flitwick, teacher of charms and head of Ravenclaw House. Ravenclaw prefers those sharp of mind. They are the Blue and Bronze House.
Yugi shook hands with a man even shorter than him, which made him feel a lot better. Being unnaturally short was not such a conspicuous thing here as it was back in Domino.
This is Professor Bathsheba Babbing, teacher of ancient ruins. Professor Charity Burbage, teacher of Muggle studies. Professor Sybil Trelawney, teacher of divination.
Professor Trelawney didn't seem at ease in the room and whispered a quick hello and fingered with her glasses. Then she hurried out the door towards somewhere. Yugi raised an eyebrow, but his feelings weren't hurt. He wasn't bothered by such anymore. However, yet he was glad when the headmaster said,
She's shy.
Dumbledore continued and introduces a witch with grey flyaway hair and a patched hat.
This is Professor Pomona Sprout, head of Hufflepuff House, who teaches anyone who is willing to learn. Hufflepuff is the yellow and black house.
Yugi held out a hand, but Professor Sprout apologized. Sorry, I've already been in the greenhouse. My hands are rather filthy. Nice to meet you, and welcome to Hogwarts. Thank you, Yugi said.
This is Septima Vector, teacher of arithmancy.
Dumbledore continued.
This is Aurora Sinistra, teacher of astronomy. This is Irma Pince, the librarian. Then we have Argus Filch, the caretaker. Professor Rolanda Hooch teaches flying to the first years and is Quidditch referee.
Professor Hooch had the most remarkable eyes Yugi had ever seen, but when Dumbledore mentioned Quidditch, he got distracted. What is Quidditch? He directly noticed that he had said something odd. Everyone was gaping at him as if he had asked them how to breathe. Only the most globally well-known wizarding sport there is, Madame Mooch said. You're not serious, right? She looked him in the eyes, then resigned. Yes, you are. Where are you from? Japan, Yugi said quickly. Even there they do play Quidditch, Madame Hooch said, disbelieving. Yugi threw the headmaster a look. Dumbledore shrugged. Clearly this was up to Yugi himself. I guess I don't keep track of such things after all. I guess I don't keep track of things. I guess I don't keep track of such things at all. I've of course heard the name before, but because I live in a Muggle residence, I don't really have track of it. Then I'm certain you'll be interested in watching the
Quidditch House Cup,
Dumbledore said, coming to Yugi's aid. I certainly will, Yugi said honestly, and awaited Dumbledore to continue with introductions.
This woman is Professor Dolores Jane Umbridge. She will teach Defense Against the Dark Arts and is appointed to this job by the Ministry of Magic.
Professor Umbridge gave an annoying little laugh when introduced. She clearly hadn't noticed the hostility in the last part of the sentence. The other staff members weren't glad to have a ministry pet among themselves. The toad-like woman shook Yugi's hand, and for some reason Yugi felt the need to wipe his hand off somewhere.
This is Professor Severus Snape. He teaches potions and is head of Slytherin House, a house that values cunning and greatness. Slytherin is the green and silver house.
The bat-like man just gave Yugi a little nod, which Yugi returned politely.
This Poppy Humphrey, the matron, and last we have Professor Minerva McGonagall, the Transfiguration teacher and the head of Gryffindor House. Gryffindor prefers the students with a brave heart. It's the Red and Gold House. She will show you to your office and chamber. She will also show you the classroom you will be teaching in, so you can decorate it before the first lesson tomorrow, 9 o'clock, with the 5th years Slytherins and Gryffindors. As deputy headmistress, she can help you with your schedule. I think we should all go and prepare our first classes tomorrow morning.
And so they were dismissed. The teachers all wished each other a goodbye and good night and left the room. Professor Hooch and Professor Burbage even said goodbye to Yugi. Shall we be off then? Professor McGonagall asked and walked with him towards the door. She was bearing a whole lot of different pieces of parchment, Yugi noticed. Do you need some help with these? He asked politely. Oh, yes, please, thanks, she said gratefully. Take the bundle down to those colored pieces of parchment. Those are all yours anyway. Yugi did as she said, and with nearly half of the burden she was carrying gone, she was able to take out her wand and levitating the pieces of parchment, so she had both her hands free. All of these? Yugi asked, incredulous. What are they for? The piece of parchment on top is... We need to take this flight of stairs. Watch out for the trick step. The piece on top is your schedule. Yugi looked down at the piece of paper in front of him. The first thing he noticed was that he was free entire Wednesday morning until lunch, and the second thing was that he wasn't going to teach any students above the 5th year. He asked Professor McGonagall why. Well, she said, not comfortable with the question. Because this is the first year you work at Hogwarts, Dumbledore didn't think you'd be fit to teach anyone above owl level. The professor went slightly red and looked straight ahead. He's probably right, Yugi said, more amused by the way she reacted to her own words than disturbed by what she had said. What? She asked, disbelieving. Oh, I'm sorry, it's just that modesty is not common among the teachers of Hogwarts. The only teacher with a bit of modesty is Professor Sprout, and she has no reason to be. Yugi laughed, amused. It isn't just my first year at Hogwarts. It's my first year teaching at all. I am quite nervous, I must confess. With the entrance you just made, I believe you've already won the heart of every student, Professor McGonagall said and laughed. She wasn't going to admit it, but she had enjoyed the look on Umbridge's face when Yugi had walked in. Besides, was Bin's well known for giving boring lessons. They are probably looking forward to it. However, I do pity you. Why? Yugi asked, concerned, and frowned. The first lesson you have tomorrow is 5th years, Gryffindor and Slytherin. That might be the greatest challenge. Do you want to keep them at peace? Despite the fact that many wish for one reunited house, that will never happen because of different values. It's mostly the Slytherins against the rest, but most of all the Gryffindors. Hufflepuff welcomes anyone and is most neutral in the feuds between Gryffindor and Slytherin. However, when forced to choose, they tend to choose Gryffindor. But that is not something I'm worried about. I will certainly be able to keep the peace. I have no doubts. What I am worried about is that my lessons will become so boring that everyone falls asleep. Yugi got very distracted by that thought.
No worries, Potter. With that plan of yours, they will most certainly stay awake. But some of them might just try to get you expelled if what we heard from Dumbledore is correct.
Thanks for the encouragement, Adem, Yugi thought dryly. Ah, here we are. The house elves have prepared your room, but you are free to decorate and change it however you like. Here, take the rest of the parchments a while. Yugi did as she asked, and she held out her wand towards the door. The door is not secured. However, we could put a security spell on it right now. Dumbledore told me you were a muggle, so I suppose you could use some help with that.
I could indeed.
Who else knows? He asked, not pleased with the headmaster at all. Just me and Severus. Dumbledore also told us your friends and family were killed by Death Eater. Some of us choose to believe that he who must not be named has returned and stay loyal to Dumbledore instead of believing that he is a power-hungry madman and Potter a liar. On the contrary to some who rather stick their heads in the sand and try to pull us down too. The Ministry of Magic? Yugi wondered. Is that why Professor Umbridge is here? Yes, she will most likely try to make us shut up. Be careful around her. She would easily turn to the Dark Lord's side if that means she could get power. She's dangerous. Yugi nodded. He had nearly figured that out himself. So what about the security spell? We can make the door ask riddles, a password. You could show him something, and he would open only when shown that particular thing. Name it, and we will fix it. All right, what about he says a word, and I need to show him something depending on what word he says? Yugi suggested. Fine, that'll be done quickly. First, she instructed him on what to do, then she said some words in Latin and walked away a few meters so she could not see what he showed the door and said. She had taken all the parchment with her. Jonochi, he started. Jonochi, Yugi started. Jonochi, the door repeated in a monotone voice, and Yugi showed him the red-eyed black dragon. Kaiba, Yugi said. Kaiba, the door repeated, and Yugi showed him the blue-eyed... The door repeated, and Yugi showed him the blue eyes white dragon. Mana, he said for the Pharaoh's sake. It was only fair that also his friends would be part of this. The door repeated, and Yugi showed him Dark Magician Girl. So he continued until he had mentioned anyone he wanted to mention and finished with, Mahad. He showed the door the dark magician and yelled at Professor McGonagall that he was done. McGonagall touched the door with her wand and gestured him to open. Otorgi, the door said, and McGonagall watched curiously as Yugi showed the door Oragoth the Relentless. The door opened, and Yugi walked in, followed by McGonagall, who was still carrying all the papers. The room was huge. To the right there was a simple four-poster bed with red curtains next to the only window. Beside the bed, his luggage awaited. An empty oak desk with a matching chair was standing against the wall, and there was a huge fireplace at the other side of the room. The interior, all by all, was rather dark. In the middle of the room, a huge chandelier hung down with lit candles. At the left, to the door, there was a huge round table, also in dark oak. Around 12 chairs stood there. The table was placed on a dark red carpet. The floor and walls were also dark wood. It wasn't directly to either Yugi's or Atem's taste. The room is under a spell. You can, by imagination, change the exterior. I do not know to what extent. I suppose you can try that out by yourself. The same counts for the office that lies there, McGonagall said, and pointed towards a door to the left, behind the round table opposite the window. They walked through it. And compared to his room, his office was rather small. There was a huge window to his right, and the desk, a larger one here, was put so that he was with his back towards the window if he sat down behind it. The walls and floor were equally dark and completely undecorated. That added up with the rain that came down from the sky, made the office look depressing. This door has the same password, or whatever, as the one you just created earlier. The door to your left... The door to the left of you leads to the same hallway as we came from. You just passed it. The door in front of you leads to the classroom. Yugi nodded and walked to check out the classroom. It was just as big as his own room, which was huge for a classroom. The door through which he entered was a little to the left of the desk that was directly in front of the blackboard. The floor where the desk stood was about half a foot higher than the rest of the class. Even here the interior was dark, but at least one of the sides was covered with windows. The benches stood in ordinary rows, and there were way more of them than necessary. McGonagall put the many pieces of parchment down on the table. Let's go through these, she suggested. We'll do it quick so you can adjust the classroom and everything else. On top is your schedule. Underneath is a calendar for you to put things in, everything from homework to detention to staff meetings. Some things have already been inserted, like the days we leave for Hogwarts, Hogsmeade and such. The present lists are the coloured ones, at the bottom. They've been put together 2 and 2 for every house present at a class. They are already in order. Somewhere there is a bundle with school rules, there is a map, and a whole lot more. Just look through it. I assume you have an owl? No, Yugi said. I've got no one to correspond with. What about her? Professor McGonagall wished she could swallow those words. I've got no home anymore to correspond with. I'll be fine. I see you tomorrow at breakfast, I suppose. Professor McGonagall was so clearly dismissed that she simply nodded and left. She had already taken a liking to the new history of magic teacher and hoped he'd survive the storm that was approaching. So, Yugi told the time out loud, time to work. Let's make sure the students think they've taken a wrong turn tomorrow morning.
It will be fun,
Yugi said, and together they started to try out the room with the spell. Hi, Harry said, moving towards his own trunk. Hi, Harry, Dean said, who was putting on his pajamas. That new teacher, you know. I have a feeling I was supposed to recognize him, as if he's well known, but I just can't put my finger on it. It feels as if you've just watched a movie with a famous actor, but you can't figure out where you've seen him before or what his name is. You know the feeling? Harry nodded. He had it a lot, but not due to movies, though. Be sure to tell me if you figure it out, Harry said. However, I have a hard time imagining that you could forget about that guy if you'd seen him before. Dean chuckled. I know! That is what bothers me the most. So you have a good holiday? Not bad, he muttered, disappointed that the mystery around the new history of magic teacher wasn't solved. However, he was sure that Dumbledore had done a thorough research about him before hiring him. He didn't want another Death Eater in disguise running around in the castle. You? He asked Dean. I was okay. Better than Seamus's anyway. He was just telling me. Why? What happened? Why? What happened, Seamus? Why? What happened, Seamus? Neville asked, genuinely concerned. It took Seamus a while before he answered, but when he did, and Harry found out the entire story, he felt like hitting something, or even someone. Deep down he knew that if he just had answered their questions, that they probably would have believed him, but he couldn't find the patience. They'll know we're right in the end, Harry thought, exhausted. He just hoped that they would realize it soon.